with me, a gentleman named Colin Heasley. And first of all, I'm going to tell you why you should pay attention to what we're going to talk about. Have you ever felt like, what is God up to? What is my calling? What is my purpose? And maybe life's kind of got you all over the place. Colin, it's been a while. I used to be your youth pastor. What was the year way back then?
Man, that would have been early 2000s. I think probably 2002, 2003.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So that was a long time ago. You of course were a wrestler. You were always this guy on fire. And I think people listening in today, they're kind of thinking, I thought I was going to go this way in life. And maybe God's kind of redirected them. What did you think back when I knew you? What did you think you were going to do with your life?
That's a great question. I definitely would think back to, the typical kid question in elementary school where you think you're going to be an astronaut or a firefighter or,
Yes.
I don't know, even a movie actor, something like that. And to be quite honest, I really never had a big vision or a direction. I was more of the day by day kind of guy. Where's God taking me? Let's see what happens. And then when I got to college, to be quite honest, my default was thinking, hey, I'll go into the military after I get my degree, and then, we'll see what happens from there. And sure enough, that is not even close to what I did. I had different plans, and he was like, nope, we're going to take you in a different direction. So yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like most of my life, anytime I have a plan, it somehow seems to alter. So
that is interesting.
I ended up where I thought I would.
That is interesting. Now, remind me, I'm trying to remember if you were you the guy who won state champ in wrestling?
I did. Yeah, I was Worthington Christian's first state champ.
First and only, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately, they don't have a program anymore. I was really hoping somebody would come along and break all my records, but I'll just have to keep hoping for that.
But let's talk about that, because and listen, some of my crowd's older, and that's cool. I'm old too. Basically, you had this highlight, this high success in wrestling career. Why did you say, I'm not going to do wrestling in college? Is that even a choice you made?
Yeah, it was. So I went to Ohio State actually to wrestle. And so started with, it was actually shortly after the current coach, Tom Ryan, started. I really felt like I was being called. I got to meet him and a couple other coaches and thought they were fantastic men. I was like, this would be a great place to go. And I went through all the preseason stuff, which is funny because that's usually most of the difficult stuff. You're doing your 2-a-day workouts, getting up 4 or 5 a.m. And it was fun, but there was a point where a friend of mine kind of asked me the question. He was like, hey, when are you going to, take the pressure off yourself? Because I kind of started to feel this weight of performance where I had to win. And if I didn't win, I wasn't succeeding. I wasn't doing well. There was almost no room for error. And I think at that point I realized, if I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to enjoy this, then it's probably time to move on to something else. And so it was about a month and a half into my short career at Ohio State that I decided to, in one sense, pull the plug on wrestling, but in another sense, it gave me the freedom actually to go back to some local schools like Westerville North and Olentangy and I think St. Francis de Sales, where I knew some coaches, and they let me come in and actually drill with their guys. And so it gave me a different opportunity, which was really cool.
Interesting. Okay, so I love this. And we met in when you were in high school. I saw God's hand on you. You're wrestling state champ, first and only one. You go to Ohio State, you realize it's not all that, it's supposed to be, where it's your life. Then you take this little detour. Is it true that you became part of one of the biggest bands, helping them out, who's won Grammy Awards? Like, this is crazy. You're young and you've been through this wild ride. Talk to me about what happened next. You thought the military, what happened?
Yeah, so going to Worthington Christian, you are taught Bible classes every day, which is fantastic. But after college, which in a lot of ways, to be honest, college was very much a testing ground for that Christian upbringing to say, is this really something that you're willing to stand on? And towards the end of my time at Ohio State, I actually had the opportunity to go to Israel and started to learn things that I would say I didn't learn at Christian school, but maybe I was just sleeping. To be honest, I'm not really sure. But I was like, if I could learn some more of these things, I would love to do that. And so I actually took a quick detour and joined a Bible school, a very small school down in Sebring, Florida, which kind of propelled me then into, after that, it was only a year program. It propelled me into working for a nonprofit in Colorado Springs. We got to travel around and do public speaking for things like worldview and apologetics with students. And then 3 years after working for that organization, I had the opportunity through some friends who were a part of a band from here from Columbus. And they said, hey, would you like a job? And at the time I was like, I have a job. And they were like, well, would you like a different job? I was like, well, if the Lord opens the doors for it and I can move out of this one into that one. And so shortly thereafter, I started touring around. It was 21 Pilots. And so I had the time for 3 years to tour with them and to learn a lot about working with internationals, working, in a very transient lifestyle. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting ride.
Wow, that is amazing. So you get involved in ministry, take some Bible stuff. Then you're with 21 Pilots, one of the biggest bands, which, if you're from Columbus, feels like we grew up with those guys because they kind of were in the youth group era too. Yeah. And then what happens next? Did you meet someone special? When does this all happen? I don't know.
Yeah. So, man, you're letting me cover it all.
Oh, hey, listen, I think it all relates because if we just share at the end, here's what Colin's doing.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, well, that was really clear. But most of us have this thing in life where it's like, oh my gosh, we're totally being moved along. And Tanisha's here. We have Joyce here. Go ahead, jump in if you're here. I know there's a bunch of people. But I think the people watching this can relate. They can say, look, but I want to go here. Why can't God just get me straight there?
Yeah.
And he tends to take us on a side journey. So what was the next side journey?
Yeah, so I definitely have the adventurer spirit. So when I was with 21 Pilots, they actually took some time off, and I was very blessed to have to be put on retainer. And I didn't know what that was at the time. I didn't know something like that even existed. So I was like, well, what do I do with this time that I have? And so I kind of utilized that time in different ways. I moved to Japan and worked for a ministry for about 3 months there. What? And then again, the adventurer spirit kind of overtook, and I worked out my truck and decked it out with various things. And I went and lived out of it for 4 months, traveling around the US. So when I finished with 21 Pilots, which would have been in 2019, I decided to do that kind of adventuring again. And so I took my truck out for 3 months and thought, I really don't know what I want to do next. I'm used to this idea, this ancient idea that the old church fathers used to live in the desert. And that's kind of the place where, you look through scripture, Jesus was, taken out into the wilderness by the Spirit. And so I thought, what a great opportunity, because I love going out to the desert. So I took my truck and went out to Arizona and Utah, and I spent some time alone. And I'd love to tell you that there was this magical moment or this epiphany, but to be honest, it was very much a peaceful time and a refreshing time. That ultimately made me realize, I'd love to just come back home, which was for me, Ohio at the time, and just be a part of a community that was familiar to me and see where that would take me. And so at the time, it took me into a construction opportunity, a construction job, which I knew nothing about, but an old football coach of mine was gracious enough to give me a chance. And it was at that time where I was kind of like, well, I'm in my 30s now, and I don't know anybody. I haven't met anybody, from a relational standpoint. I'm not pursuing anybody. What does it look like for me to live contentedly as a single person? And I finally was able to, in some ways, find that. And it was about a week later. Our church had just opened up for COVID, and I walked into a young lady that I had actually grown up with, but never really spoken to. And fast forward that 1 year, we just got married about 2 weeks ago. So
no way.
Lots of things happened very quickly.
Whoa. So just when you thought, okay, God, I'm single, it's cool, it's happening. By the way, Tanisha, that was her story too. And then boom, God has you meet somebody, and that's amazing. That's like an unexpected blessing. Do you think God, gives us these things a lot? What do you think, Colin?
I think we just got to look for them. I don't know. Sometimes I think we're trying to find the place where we want to be involved and what we want to do instead of maybe looking for the place that God is actually working, and just allow him to say, hey, I want to invite you into this place that you can then do something here because I prepared you for this moment. And so for me, I think I just started seeing maybe some single friends who were just a little discontent. And I thought, well, if we're supposed to be, if every place that you find yourself in life, whether it's married, whether it's single, widowed, whatever it is, God's not done with us. So what's he doing with us? So how do you find contentment in being single, and what's God doing? And so I started to realize God's given me a lot of freedom with my time. And so I want to utilize that time, because a lot of my married friends, they may not have been able to, just pick up and go do something. So I thought, well, if my other friends and I, my other single friends and I can go support them and love them, maybe take care of their kids, give them a date night, something like that. I'd love to be able to use that singleness to help out the body of Christ. And so, yeah, it was, a week later, of course, that it was like, well, now you're going to start spending your time with somebody else. And so
there you go. There you go.
Was very much a God moment as well. But
well, yeah. And it looks like your cousin Shannon says, hey, from
hey,
Ann Arbor. Hey, that's pretty cool. So now, Colin, let's talk about, where does God have you now? Because, I get it. People might be like, dude, this is a publishing agency. Why are we talking about, Colin and this whole story? But here's the interesting thing. I truly believe, Colin, that everybody, this is my personal belief, everybody should write a book. And why? Because everybody has a book inside them. It's, it talks about in scripture how we are the letters. Paul talks about that. We are God's letters, God's writing, God's the artist, God's the author. In fact, his history is his story. So you got this thing where maybe you might not have written a book yet, but God is writing a book in you. Now, what are you doing? What's your passion?
Yeah. So about 5 months ago, I started working for a nonprofit here in Columbus. It's based on the west side in Hilliard. It's funny because it was sold to me by a friend as a sales opportunity.
Okay.
Of course, that friend actually didn't really know what the job was. He just thought, hey, I heard something about it. It sounds like a great opportunity for you. And so I sat down for an interview, and now my current boss, Joel, he said, so what did our mutual friend, tell you this job was? I was like, well, he told me it was a sales job, and I'm not really a salesperson. He was like, well, he's sort of right, but let me kind of flesh it out for you. And so LifeWise Academy is the organization that I started with, and you can sort of see behind me, I think my head's a little bit in the way, but Stand for Truth is actually the ministry. And we have 3 strategies that all seek to do the same thing, and it's to reach public school students with the gospel. And so they have a public speakers network. They also have a concert opportunity where they actually have bands that put on concerts and are able to share the gospel. And then LifeWise, again, which is what I've started working for, is the newest edition. So in the 50s, 1952, the U.S. Supreme Court actually made it constitutional that public school students could be released from public school during the day to receive religious instruction, as long as it was off the school campus, it was privately funded, and parents actually gave their students permission. And so some of the leaders on the staff here at Stand for Truth were like, well, that's an incredible idea. In fact, why has nobody heard of this? This has got to be one of the greatest missed opportunities of the American church. So how can we take something like this and create the tools all in one place, provide for a community to come together and start a Bible-based character education program for students? So that's what we do. And as far as me, I get to work with communities and help them make this possible. So that's kind of the short and sweet of LifeWise.
Wow. So You're basically saying, look, I'm not going to push it on anybody, but if somebody wants to grow in their faith, grow in biblical character, you essentially have the tools, the resources, you know how to do it, to work with schools to make this happen. What does that look like? Let's say somebody was watching and they say, hey, I want to get involved, or how do I bring that to my school? I don't live in Ohio. Give me some thoughts here.
Yeah. So the beauty of that constitutional ruling is that, all 50 states being underneath that. Now it's interesting, a little over half of the states actually have specific policies on their, school boards within the state that allow for it. And even like Ohio, for example, there's even less, but there are a few states where students can actually receive credit.
Are you serious? Wow.
Yeah, so our flagship program up in Van Wert, they're actually looking to start a program for their high schoolers this coming fall. They're going to work with Ohio Christian University. And so the high schoolers would be able to actually have a biblically based program with a worldview focus where they could receive high school and potentially college credit for that. So the cool thing is that any state, it is possible. Simply going online, we try to make it very easy for people. If you go online, it's a 3-step process.
Okay.
And the first one is simply to grow a community interest list. So we put that on our website, lifewiseacademy.org/interest. You can actually find your school district. And then it just kind of asks you, your interest level of LifeWise, would you like to see one happen? Would you commit to praying for it? Your name and information. And then as that list grows, then we actually begin to have a community interest meeting where we start to talk about what the next steps are.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Wow. So talk a little bit about, is Joel the founder?
He is. So Joel was went to my alma mater as well, which this is a side note, and maybe you'll lose some viewership for this since, you probably have some Ohio people. Oddly enough, I grew up a Michigan fan.
I got you. Hey, my wife's from
went to Ohio State, and so I had to be upfront with Joel when I was in my interview process, and fortunately, he was gracious enough to hire me on. But yeah, Joel shortly after college was working with FCA and started Stand for Truth. And then Stand for Truth has been around since 2007. LifeWise Academy was added as that third strategy in 2018. So Van Wert was actually, that's where he's from. And so Van Wert had started a release time program in 2012. And the neat thing with them is I think less than a third of the people in their town actually attend church. And within year one, their elementary school, 1st through 5th grade, they had a 60% participation rate in this Bible class.
Wow.
And then by year 3, 95% of the kids were actually participating. So that's when Joel and other leaders on Stand for Truth staff were like, there's something going on here. How do we figure out, how do we make this possible for other communities around the country to be able to do this with efficiency, with ease?
Why do you think young people are hungry for scripture? I mean, we live in a world where we got electronic everything, toys, distractions. Why do you think there was such a interest?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I was, so first of all, and I feel like I should backtrack here, but I'm very new to the Igniting Souls tribe. And so I was excited to get online and to watch some of the interviews and just kind of make myself familiar with it. And one of the things that stood out to me was, your who, why, and where. Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? Which are really big questions. When I used to work for the nonprofit in Colorado Springs, we used to look at some of life's big questions like identity and purpose, morality, origin. And so I feel like right now, a lot of those questions are they're lingering and we don't have the answers. One thing I noticed when I was touring is that there was no real foundation with which people stood on. There's a lot of ideas. There was a lot of things that, we could talk about, that I would talk about with my coworkers, but there was never really anything that was definite, anything that was certain. And so I feel like right now perhaps with our social media, perhaps with how quickly things change, in a world of Twitter, of TikTok, it's instant. There's constantly something new. Everything changes. And so, you're just kind of like, well, wait, is that true? Or is that true? Wait, who's right? Who's, who should I follow? Who should I believe in? And so I think that there's a hunger for finding something solid to stand on. And for me, at least with LifeWise, I think taking the Bible and having the opportunity to teach it to the next generation, I believe builds a foundation for them to at least begin answering those questions. And then as they grow, it gives them something to go back to say, I've got this new question, where should I go first? How can I answer it? And I think scripture is a fantastic place. Personally, I think it is the best place to go back to begin asking those questions and finding those answers.
So people want something that's more rock solid, unchanging than just the latest tweet that comes and goes.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. What results, we got about 6-7 more minutes. What results have you seen? Have you found any young people that found hope, found truth? Any stories like this?
So I've had a couple of opportunities. So we've got 8 live programs right now across 5 school districts. We are currently working with 20 schools, 20 communities to actually start programs this coming fall. And then we're working with another dozen or so communities that are in that phase 1. We have 3 phases. They're in phase 1, looking to start next fall of 2022. So things are moving. We're actually going to have our first urban program here in Columbus in the Whitehall area, and then our first suburban program in New Albany, which is super exciting. That's
great. Listen, Joyce says, and maybe this is your first international, is this only for the US? We need something like this in the UK.
That's a great question. And that is a recent question that other people have been asking us. And so if you want to do, please begin praying, because I know for our organization, that is a prayer. We want to see it spread, and we do want to see it in Europe. So we don't know what that all entails, but it is definitely something that we want to see happen. So
for sure, people can go to lifewiseacademy.org/interest. And then we're talking about, Melissa says, please connect with me. She's got 7 principals and she's a retired educator. So you're going to have to go back to this live stream and kind of like follow up with some people.
Definitely.
So is there needs financially? Is there needs volunteer? We've heard this journey where God's kind of led you. Some people here might want to get involved.
Yeah. The cool thing is that we have all sorts of opportunities, ways to get involved. Depending on, your interests. For example, if you're looking at a volunteer level, looking into one of the current live programs. So our classrooms require at least 1 teacher and then minimum of 2 volunteers. So for those live programs, there's plenty of volunteer opportunities. Now with starting up programs, there's a leadership board. There definitely are fundraising committees that we help coach through the process of what it looks like to raise money. There's communication and logistics with the school, within the community. There are social media opportunities within local programs. So, if there's a program started in your community, that's one way. Look for that. You could get involved with your local team. If you don't have one, again, I would suggest beginning that process of starting one. If it's something you mentioned, finances, we have the opportunity to invest in individuals within our organization. You can invest in local communities, and you can invest in our national fund, which actually goes towards as well helping a lot of our local communities as well. So definitely places to get involved. Within our website, you can also send in those questions too if there's something that anybody has, and we'd be happy to answer them.
Yes. Well, this is great. And I know you and I caught up recently after a long time, and it was just fun to hear what God's doing. More than anything today, I wanted people to realize that, look, you might think that a door's closing. You might think that God's forgotten you, or, hey, did COVID surprise God? Or what about all these things that we think are random? And yet as we look at your life, Colin, it's like God has been putting you on a path, as he's been putting on everybody on a path here.
Yeah.
And how cool is it that as you found your purpose, now you're helping other young people find their purpose? Isn't that kind of interesting how it's like before we can help other people really get clarity, sometimes we got to get straight with God and figure that out. What do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know we all, I couldn't have said it better. We all want to be able to help other people. That's kind of our culture right now, is reaching across the table, loving, supporting. But until we can do that, like you said, for ourselves and begin to understand who we are and what we stand for, it can be challenging sometimes to make those next steps.
Fantastic. Well, you have someone who just said this was my God's call to action today.
Nice.
Melissa says
I
that.
love it.
So,
I love it.
Hey, folks, we are all about souls on fire, and Colin is a soul on fire, and he's part of an organization that is helping young people. And I'll tell you what, I remember my teenage years just having a lot of questions, a lot of big questions. Some people were just hooked on substances, and they were just kind of distracting themselves. Me, I was asking God big, deep questions, and it's so cool that you have a ministry now that gives an answer to these young people. So, Colin, thanks for sharing today, and we'll put up that link one more time, LifeWiseAcademy.org, and keep sharing the love out there, okay?
Thank you. I appreciate the time, Kary, and the same to you and the Igniting Souls Tribe. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Take care, everybody. Check out his website and go be a soul on fire. We'll see you.